안녕하십니까.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the Inclusive Multilateralism Initiative session of the Global Korea Convention 2020. My name is Ha Ho-jung of the KDI School of Public Policy and Management. Pleased to meet you. For the next 2 hours or so, we will be conducting this session on Korea's role for international cooperation. We have invited experts from relevant organizations for presentations and discussions. Before we go into the actual presentations, we would like to invite President Yoo Jong-il of the KDI School of Public Policy and Management for his opening remarks. Please welcome him with a big round of applause.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to welcome you to the Global Korea Convention 2020, which is a very meaningful event. As part of the Global Korea Convention 2020, we're holding the session on inclusive multilateralism and related strategies. I believe that the session represents the key principles and ideals that this convention is pursuing. In that regard, I would like to express my gratitude to Chairman Song Kyung-ryun of NRC and many other organizations. I know that there have been many staff members working hard to put this event together. Thank you very much. I would also like to express my gratitude to Mr. Ham Sang-uk from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for taking time out of his busy schedule to be here. I would now like to take this opportunity to say a few words. I will be very brief, and I would have to invite Chairman Song Kyung-ryun from NRC for a few words. When I look back on the history of humanity, I think that we're repeating the past history that we had 100 years ago. In the late 19th century, we had the Spanish flu, and now the world is going through another major pandemic. After the pandemic and the First World War, there was this turn of the century from the 19th century and the 20th century, and there was a lot of optimism that people had, which was disrupted. And after the pandemic and the First World War, there were chaotic situations in the world, economically and socially. There was the call for the end of history, and there were predictions that the world would become borderless. So in the middle of the 20th century, there was full of optimism for liberalism and free market and liberal international order. So people had this belief that we would continue to progress in this direction. So that was the mainstream idea until recently. However, now all the existing global orders and mechanisms have been disrupted. So it seems that we're repeating the past history once again. After the French Revolution, in the Western Hemisphere, there were movements for modernism and progress of human history. And there was this liberalism. The principle of liberalism seems to now be faced with limitations. In order to take a leap forward, I'm not saying that we should give up on liberalism, but we need to come up with an upgrade version of liberalism, and we need to discuss how we can achieve this. So on one hand, we need to ensure that everyone is equal before the law. We need to uphold this value. And to do so, we need to work hard to eliminate inequality in our society. Otherwise, if we still have inequality, then we cannot guarantee equality for all.
말로는 인권의 존중이고
Also, when it comes to human rights, we talk about the importance of human rights and diversity, but it is indeed time for all of us to recognize and appreciate diversity and promote human rights. So these are the kinds of values that we need to adhere to in this time and age.
이 포용적 다자주의 이니셔티브
Now,
이거를 딱
when I saw this title of the session, which is Inclusive Multilateralism Initiative, I had to agree that this is what we really need today.
대한민국이 뭐 나를 따르라라고 하는 것이 아니라
Korea
대한민국이 이렇게
may not necessarily be a sole leader, but can make meaningful contribution, and we can invite other countries to join hands in promoting these common values. And that should be the direction of our diplomacy, so we can be a valuable member of the global community and promoting international cooperation. That in and itself will be also an opportunity for Korea to become successful and expand the scope of diplomacy. I'm not an expert, but these are the kinds of ideas that I've been pondering upon.
이런 좋은 자리를
So it is my great pleasure to be part of this meaningful session.
좋은 또 발제
And I look forward to all the presentations and the discussions. Thank you very much to the presenters and the discussants. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President Yoo Jong-il. Although unexpected, we would like to take this opportunity to invite Chairman Sung Kyung-yoon of NRC for his remarks. Please welcome the chairman with a big round of applause.
네, 여러분 반갑습니다.
Pleased to meet you.
이번 우리가 3일 동안
So for 3 days since yesterday, we are hosting this event titled Global Korea Convention 2020.
행사들 중에 저는 아마 제일
There are numerous sessions within this convention, and I believe that this session is probably the most important session.
우리 글로벌 코리아 포럼이라는 모임을
We created a forum under the name of Global Korea Forum last year. At that time, our recognition was that we have many overseas projects and international cooperation is very important. We need to take a look at the 26 organizations under the banner of NRC to take a look at their projects, and I could see that all of them existed in silos. And therefore, I started to think that we need to bring together these organizations. I had a turning point. 3 of our member organizations were operating their offices in Beijing, the Korea Agricultural Economics Institute, KDI, and KIEP. And I said, do the 3 organizations share information? Do you have meals together? Do you collaborate? And they told me that they do not do any of those things. And so that got me thinking. There are 340 or so government organizations, and I thought all of them work in silos. So I met KOICA, I met Korea Foundation, I met the Overseas Korean Foundation. And so I met about 10 organizations one by one. And I continued to ask the same question. What are your overseas projects? Do you have opportunities to cooperate or share thoughts with Korean organizations working locally? Most of them do not work together. Well, if there is an official event hosted by the embassy, then they would go together and say hello. But that was it. All 340 organizations are operated with taxpayers' money. And I thought, if we could cooperate, we could do more with the same budget. And so Mr. Koo-yeon-chul, who is the Vice Chairman of the Ministry of Finance and Planning, and Vice Minister Lee Tae-ho of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Those two gentlemen and I started to discuss this issue, and we met more and more organizations, and we thought that we need to get the ball rolling for at least sharing information. And that is why we started the Global Korea Forum. We invited scholars to speak at our forum, and this year we are met by this unprecedented crisis of COVID-19. It was totally unexpected. And I thought, if we continue to share what we have done, and if we continue our dialogue, then we would be able to find our universal value and some common action plans. And that is why we are hosting this event. Yesterday, during the opening ceremony, we declared the Vision Korea Declaration. I actually asked 3 experts to write the declaration draft: Professor Kim Tae-hoon, Professor Kim Tae-hwan, and Professor Kim Sun-yup of Korea University came up with the draft. And I could see that the content was great. It was indeed a vision that we could all share. And yesterday we declared the vision. The vision includes various keywords, but it is inclusive multilateralism. That is at the center of the vision, which is the title for this session. Many media channels, they usually are not interested in what I say, but many people asked, what is inclusive multilateralism? And many people like that word. Multilateralism is different from unilateralism and bilateralism. It is about everyone in the global society participating together with equal status and equal qualification to develop norms together and to follow the norms as a basis for world peace and cooperation. But the larger countries, the more powerful countries, they feel like multinationalism is now a burden, and sometimes they withdraw from their promised participation. And that actually shakes the core of the international order. That is why we need to stand by multilateralism. But it should not be just any multilateralism. It should be inclusive multilateralism. Whether a country is strong or weak, whether a country is poor or rich, they should all be able to participate on equal grounds so that we can come to conclusions with a consensus. So we need to have open and inclusive and safe international order based on inclusive multilateralism. Well, I don't know if my explanation to the media was correct, but I'm sure that the people here today can tell us if it is or not. It's not about the powerhouses setting the rules and the other countries following their rules and playing by their rules, but we need to have inclusive multilateralism. The countries that strive for inclusive multilateralism should come together to exchange opinions and to create a new international order. We need to participate in inclusive multilateralism so that we can play a role in creating a new world order. Many of the scholars present here in this room have conducted research under the topic of global soft power. We have had opportunities to present our researches and discuss these results, and those researches became the theoretical background to the hosting of this convention. Based on such theories, we need to build a new principle of inclusive multilateralism. When we adopted the declaration yesterday, I explained why we are declaring the vision. And I also mentioned that it is not complete in its form, but as we have a great declaration that we have as a vision, we hope that this vision could be reflected by the actual practitioners and agencies that are acting on behalf of Korea for inclusive multilateralism. We hope that the vision will become a guideline. Of course, we are just in the initial stages. The completion of this vision will be achieved through discussions which will help us mature our vision. We hope to gradually refine our vision. Many people could relate to our vision and my statement, and especially people who have not had opportunities to meet me have expressed their opinions about how great they think this principle is. And yesterday, Mr. Kim Song-gon, president of the Overseas Korean Association, who just stepped into office, thanked me for this principle. He sent me a text and he said he supports inclusive multilateralism. And so I hope that this session will be an opportunity to discuss inclusive multilateralism and lead to productive suggestions.
Thank you very much, Chairman Song Kyung-yoon, for your remarks. Next, I would like to invite Mr. Ham Sang-uk from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for his welcoming remarks.
Good afternoon. As have been introduced, I am Ham Sang-uk from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in charge of multinational diplomacy. With COVID-19, there is a higher need for international cooperation, and we have this very timely topic of inclusive multinationalism. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Chairman Song Kyung-yoon of NRC, as well as President Yoo Jong-il of the KDI School of Public Policy and Management. Even before COVID-19, with the escalation of competition between the two powerhouses and the increase in protectionism, multilateralism was taking steps back, or there were concerns that it was taking steps back which has existed since the World War I and II. And I believe COVID-19 has exposed the vulnerabilities. COVID-19 knew no borders, and so many countries locked down their borders, and they tried to survive on their own. This has impacted human resource exchanges as well as the global trade. For decades, we have built the foundation of cooperation, but that foundation tumbled overnight. But ironically, the spread of COVID-19 revealed the necessity of international cooperation, not only for COVID-19, but for climate change, SDGs, and the recovery of open economies are some of the challenges that we are faced with. These are challenges that no one country can solve. These are challenges that call for cooperation amongst neighbors and countries around the world. We see that relations between strong countries are becoming strained, and there are limitations to the current world order. And therefore, the role of countries like Korea, which has had a strong response to COVID-19, is receiving high expectations. We have grown based on multilateralism, and with open and democratic response to COVID-19, we are becoming a model for the world. Many countries are looking to us for the future. And in response to the expectations of the international community, the Korean government is now pursuing international cooperation measures based on inclusion. We are participating in the COVAX facility that is looking to provide vaccines for countries around the world, and we are planning to provide $110 billion for vaccinations in developing countries. We are also coming up with ODA Korea Building Trust Initiative, which is striving for shared prosperity, especially working with Colombia, Uzbekistan. We are working with comprehensive emergency support projects for our partners. From the multilateral aspect, we have led the UN, WHO, and UNESCO to create a group, and we are also working on maintaining the international value chain so that we can maintain growth by enabling the exchange of human resources. We believe that international cooperation should not take steps back because of COVID-19. With the P4G summit to be hosted in Korea next year, we will be leading the agenda of climate change, playing a role to bridge advanced countries with developing countries. Next year, we celebrate our joining the UN. It will be our 30th anniversary along with North Korea. And we hope to host an international conference so that we can lead the participation for peace and shared prosperity. As a policy for the future, we hope to combine high-tech industries with human-centered philosophies to create the Korean New Deal policy. For international cooperation, we need to strive for inclusive multilateralism, and we need to come up with mid to long terms to contribute to this agenda. With unilateralism and the G2 conflict impacting multilateralism, this could translate into the decrease in international cooperation. But I believe that inclusive multilateralism is the stage for enhanced international cooperation. In setting the new landscape, we can contribute from three fronts. First, we need to come up with a global governance to respond to global challenges together. IHR and the UN and WHO should work together to come up with the health norm. And so, by having this rule-based participation, we will be able to share our rule-based development experience to come up with solidarity and cooperation based on inclusion. Second, we also need to have multifaceted cooperation. International cooperation has been led by powerful countries in the past, but now we need to have multiple strands of cooperation by more countries so that we could have diverse international cooperation and solidarity propelled by different agendas. And we also need to talk about the issue of new security. We have come through the crisis of health, security, cybersecurity, economy, and societal issues, and therefore international cooperation is absolutely necessary. Traditional security issues are focused on geopolitical issues, but we need to take a look at the new security issues, mainly centered around technology, and we believe that countries like Korea have much to contribute. We hear in the news that vaccines for COVID-19 is being developed, and so we see more dialogue on the distribution of vaccines and the relevant international cooperation. We hope that through the discussion today, we can utilize our experience of the past to strive for inclusive multilateralism. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ham Sang-wook, for your welcoming remarks. Now, let us begin the presentation session. The session will be moderated by Dean Yoo Jong-il of KDI School of Public Policy and Management. I'd like to invite the moderator, the presenters, and the discussants up to the stage. Please welcome them with a big round of applause. According to the disease control measures, In response to COVID-19, I'd like to remind you that you need to keep your masks on while you're on the stage.
들어온 건가요?
Is the mic
잘
on?
들리시죠?
Can you hear me?
안녕하세요.
Okay. Good afternoon.
이제, 본격적으로
Let us now begin
발전이
the presentation and the discussion sessions.
저는 좌장 맡은
I am,
유정일이고요.
once again, Yu Jong-il. I'll be moderating the session. We have 3 presenters, and after all the presentations are delivered, we will hear from the designated discussants.
그 후에
And then
약간의 의견 교환을
we will exchange our views and thoughts if time is available.
발표자들께 한 15분 정도로
I'm going to give each presenter 15 minutes for their presentation.
첫 번째 발표는
The first presentation
좀 전에 성경유 사장님
is related to what Chairman Song Kyung-ryun mentioned in his beginning remarks. It is about inclusive multilateralism.
일각을 담당하셨고
And Professor Kim Tae-hwan
교수님께서
played a big role in drafting the vision for Grand Korea. He is a professor at the Korea National Diplomacy Academy. He will give a presentation on global soft power and diplomacy strategies for middle powers. Please welcome him.
안녕하세요.
Good afternoon. I am Kim Tae-hwan from the Korea National Diplomacy Academy. Thank you very much for joining us for this afternoon session. What I'm going to discuss today is global soft power and strategies of diplomacy for Korea as a middle power. In this respect, I'm going to make 3 points. First of all, there are many different views and definitions about a middle power, so I want to share with you my own understanding of a middle power and diplomacy as a middle power. And then I would like to discuss what Korea has been doing in the past as a middle power in terms of its diplomatic activities and what challenges we are faced with. And finally, I am going to discuss the direction of diplomacy for Korea as a middle power going forward. As you may know, and as Chairman Song Kyung-ryun and Dean Yu Jong-il mentioned, COVID-19 is such a buzzword for all of us in this year of 2020, and it is still ongoing. With the COVID-19 pandemic, some people argue that the basic international order may be disrupted. But in my view, the COVID-19 pandemic was an opportunity for us to see that the pandemic has accelerated all the trends that have already been going on before the outbreak of the pandemic. There are many different trends that have already been underway, and I'd like to pay attention to 2 of these trends. More than any time in the past, when we needed international cooperation, we cannot see international cooperation. And one of the reasons why was because of intensifying competition between the US and China. As a result, there is the absence of global leadership. And secondly, as a result of the lack of leadership, multilateralism is under serious threat. And the question that I've been pondering upon is, given these circumstances where we have no leadership from the superpowers and multilateralism is under threat, what can countries like Korea do as middle powers? So this is a big question that I've been thinking about. And here, what I want to emphasize is that even before the pandemic, in international politics, there were discussions on the blockization of values in the world. What I mean by this is that on one hand, we have these values promoted by democracies such as the US and Western Europe, That's liberalism. And then on the other hand, there is this block of counter-liberalism for countries like China and Russia.
과거의 냉전 시대의 그 이념적인
When you think about the ideological competition during the Cold War, this is quite different from what's happening these days. Because even within liberal democracies, you can find groups of people who support populism and counter liberalism. So we have seen the emergence of these groups of people even within democratic countries. So this type of ideological confrontation is quite different from what we had during the Cold War. And the COVID-19 pandemic has been an acceleration of this trend and bipolarization of values. I believe that when President-elect Joe Biden, President-elect, becomes president, this blockization of values may even become more prevalent because President Biden is going to promote liberalism and liberal values even more so than President Trump. Then what can we do as a middle power? This is a big question we need to discuss. When you think about middle powers, these are about the recognition of the status as countries, and it's about self-recognition of these countries as middle powers. And even though you argue that you are a middle power, this may not be sufficient. So by exercising diplomatic efforts, you should also gain that recognition as a middle power in the international community. So all the diplomatic activities that you may carry out in order to gain this recognition can be called diplomacy as a middle power. In that sense, when you have self-recognition and also gain recognition from the international community through diplomatic activities, then you become a middle power. In that sense, I believe that there are four key components. First of all, you need to have the physical capabilities, especially economic and military capabilities as a middle power. That's number one you need to have. And secondly, you need to have the self-recognition that you are a middle power. This is the self-image that I'm talking about. So that's the second element. And the third element is, unlike the superpowers, middle powers not only need to have good military and economic forces, but also they need to have soft power, which is based on values and norms. And finally, when it comes to the diplomatic role that a middle power plays, they promote multilateralism. And so that's the key part of middle power diplomacy, because these are not superpowers, they are middle powers, they promote multilateralism. And having said that, as for Korea, when you look at the white paper published by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, since 1990s, Korea came to recognize itself as a middle power. That started in the 1990s. Because we are a middle power, by utilizing middle power diplomacy in East Asia and also in the international community, we need to play that role as a middle power. That has been stipulated in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs white paper. But when we look at the current reality, globally, Korea is doing well when it comes to global issues such as climate change response and peacekeeping operations. So when it comes to dealing with global issues, Korea has been doing well, but unfortunately, we have limited diplomatic resources that have to be allocated on so many different fronts. So there's overstretching of our diplomatic resources. And another issue is that when it comes to East Asia, we have China, Japan, Russia, and North Korea in this region. There are these actors in the region, and they have certain expectations about Korea. And then there are certain expectations that we impose upon ourselves, and there's a gap between our expectations and their expectations upon Korea. So globally, Korea has been successful as a middle power, but in the region, Korea has not been that successful.
제가 좀그 현황으로서 말씀드리고 싶은 것은
And another point that I want to make is
중경국 또는
that
역할,
domestically
역할 정체성에 대한
we have this identity as a middle power, but it seems that we do not have a strong social consensus on the understanding of Korea as a middle power and what we need to do as a middle power when it comes to our relations with the US and also with North Korea. Depending on your political ideology, there are different views and confrontations between the two political fronts.
아니라 한국 사회에서도
It's not just the political circle, but in the Korean society, there are many conflicts
상당히 자기적
and tensions among groups of people who have different values and different priorities. Therefore, there's a lack of a strong consensus within Korea about Korea being recognized as a middle power.
말씀드리고 싶은
And the final point that I want to make is this. Now,
나가야 될
what
중경국 외교의
direction do we need to take
무엇이냐?
in promoting diplomacy as a middle power?
멀리 내다봐야 할 것은 아까 이미
The vision is something that Chairman Song Kyung-yoon has already mentioned. We have a long-term vision, which is inclusive multilateralism. Why do we need to promote that? Since the Second World War, multilateralism has evolved greatly.
2차 대전 이래로는
But
상당히 그
since the Second World War, there was more of a collaborative multilateralism, and this was possible because at that time, during the Cold War, there were democracies based on capitalism, and they had the shared value of liberalism, and so they had this common foundation or basis upon which they were able to cooperate. So cooperative multilateralism was quite effective. However, the Cold War ended, and in the 1990s and 2000s,
제가 지금 명칭을 붙였지만
I like to name it this way, but now we have a competitive multilateralism or confrontational multilateralism. What I mean by this is, of course, there are many reasons why, but one of them would be
중국을 비롯한
that now China and other emerging countries have been rising and they are beginning to express their voices and asking for their stake in the international community. And as a result, unlike in the past where we were able to promote cooperative multilateralism based on shared values, now within the multilateral frameworks, there are different voices and there is competition or confrontation within the multilateral framework.
아주 대표적으로 UN 내부
For instance, even within the UN system, this is
이런
observed.
상황에서 특히 아까 제가 제일
Now, given these situations, as I mentioned in the beginning,
국제 질서의 양극화
there is bipolarization of the international order and block formation of the values. As a result, when we desperately need international cooperation, we're not able to cooperate effectively. And in this context, we need inclusive multilateralism. Whether you belong to liberalism or belong to counter-liberalism, we should be able to include all of these countries so that we can promote international cooperation under the umbrella of multilateralism. And this is something that is very important, and this is something that we need to pursue as a middle power.
한국의 중경국 외교의 첫 번째 방향성
Therefore, number one direction we need to take is to become a middle power that is neutral. We do not side with any of these two sides, but we maintain the middle of the road. And that is number one direction we need to take.
예를 들자면 이런 겁니다. 지금 그
Let me give you an
전제
example.
국제 질서를 좀 단순화시켜서
Currently,
두
we
가지
can
국제
express
부정학적 로직과 그림의
international order like this in this table. We have the geopolitical logic and multilateralism logic and liberalism protection or liberalism reform. So in these quadrants,
통해서 도출하고
you can see how they are divided. For instance, Japan and Australia belong to the first quadrant, and Germany and EU and Canada, they promote liberalism, but they prefer multilateralism. And then Turkey, even though it is also a middle power, they have ambition as a geopolitical power, so they prefer geopolitical logic and they also want to do something that is against the existing international order. But what I pay attention to is the last one. Here, there are these countries who are in the position of having to take sides under pressure. And Korea may belong to this fourth quadrant. So it is very important for Korea to maintain the neutral stance. And to do so, we need to establish neutral values and norms. It's not necessarily liberalism or counter-liberalism, but it has to be a value that maintains neutrality. For instance, as Johan Galton said, active peace or addressing the human security based on health. There are no left or right ideologies about these values that are common for the humanity. And based on these neutral values and norms, we need to have specific issues and specific policy areas. In other words, we need agendas, and agenda setting is crucial. And as a result, following this agenda setting, we should not stop at cooperation, but it has to lead to specific action and implementation. And we also need to spread these neutral values by utilizing public diplomacy. And we can even take a step further. What I want to emphasize here is that these neutral norms and values will be critical in serving as a buffer between these two blocks of values, between liberalism and counter-liberalism. There may be conflicts and tension, but we can serve as a buffer. And secondly, based on these neutral values, we can create an inclusive coalition or solidarity. It not only includes state actors, but also non-state actors. And third, we talk about soft power of America or Korea, of individual countries. But now we have to go beyond that to promote collective soft power by creating a coalition of countries that include both state and non-state actors. We can create and develop collective soft power that will bring about power in establishing new global order. And then we have to make sure that these coalitions or partnerships will not be affected or swayed by superpower conflict. And here the notion is soft balancing. Hard balancing is, of course, using military forces, but here we use non-military tools and diplomatic measures to maintain soft balance. And ultimately, by going through all these steps, we should be able to build a geopolitical law. We should be able to create a counterforce that can fight against geopolitical logic. And that should be the direction of Korea in its diplomacy as a middle power. Thank you.
네, 김태환 교수님 감사합니다.
Thank you very much, Professor Kim Tae-hwan, for your presentation. The second presentation
수출입은행
will be by Korea Exim Bank. It will be presented by Mr. Kim Joo-hong, who is leading the Overseas Project Development Team. He will talk to us about financial support or examples of financial support for overseas investment projects. Please welcome him with a big round of applause. Pleased to meet you. I am Kim Joo-hong of Korea Exim Bank. Thank you very much for this invitation. The contents that I will be presenting today are very practical issues. I do hope that for the collaboration and cooperation between relevant organizations, we can lead to improved results. And I believe that the contents that I will be presenting will be relevant to that goal. The front part of my presentation will be the introduction of Korea Exim Bank, so I will skip over those slides and jump right to slide number 12.
제가 오늘 먼저 말씀드릴 내용은
Today, I would like to talk about the recent Korean trends and the market trends.
JVIC의 사례를 보면
Well, first, let's take a look at the example of JVIC.
이 포트폴리오의 구성 요소를
It
보시면
seems that within the portfolio of JVIC,
그런 포트폴리오로
they have a portfolio of overseas investment.
뭐잘안 보이시죠?
Well, I don't know if you can see the colors, but the orange color is the portion of overseas investment. And as of 2017, that was close to 64%.
수출 금융은 상당히 많이
You could see that export financing has decreased and financing overseas has increased. And this is US EXIM.
뭐 최근에 그 미국과 중국
And we see that due to the recent conflicts between China and the US,
중국계 금융기관
this is impacting finance as well. We see that the Chinese financial institutions are quite aggressive in their marketing and practice,
뭐라 그럴까요?
which
위협의
is
대상이 된다고 할까요?
threatening other financial institutions.
기존에 있는 그
And so,
이 회원국들
amongst the existing OECD member states
구체적인 이 수출 금융을 실행하는
and the ECAs
그러한 그 프랙티스에 대해서
are
뭐 많은 컨설이 있는 것이 또 사실입니다.
having concerns about the practices of China.
DFI
And so,
C를
in the US, they have launched the DFC in December.
중국의 그런 그 공격적인
And
금융에 대응하기
concerning the aggressive finance of China, the US has introduced the China program.
차이나 프로그램의 내용을 뭐 간략히
If we take a look at the contents of the China program,
조건과 대등한
this is
대출과 보증
that
보험을 제공했다.
insurances, loans, and other financial activities will be conducted on par with the conditions of China.
주요 내용은
And the main contents of the export contracts are related to the limitations of loans and trade, but China is not a part of the OECD, and so these rules do not apply to China. And so that is why US EXIM has introduced a China program to match the conditions of China. In order to match those conditions, there is a procedure that they must go through within the OECD, and so the US is pushing to streamline these processes so that they become simplified. And
큰 틀에서 좀 바꿨으면 좋겠다.
they are also working on changing the large framework.
뭐 DFC에 대해서는 제가 뭐 간단히
Concerning DFC, I think I have already briefly touched upon this.
US 엑심 이
but
수급과 좀 다른 점은
It's different from the existing US EXIM
없더라도
in that even if it's not related to America's interests, they can provide support. And along with loans, guarantees, and insurance, they can also provide support for other financial vehicles. And so you can see that support is much more diverse. Canada's EDC or SACE and the UKEF, these are European ECAs, showing that rather than emphasizing the domestic contents, but they are focusing on how beneficial it is to their national interest. The reason why they are moving in this direction is because sourcing is becoming quite global. And so they cannot simply support their contents. If they only support their own contents, then the scope of their support would be much smaller. For Korea as well, we have a lot of foreign investments, and JVIC also has a lot of foreign investment. And so these banks are no longer in a position to focus only on domestic contents, but rather they're focusing on global contents and global sourcing, but focused on the benefits for their national interest. Here is the market trends. I'm sure many other organizations are trying to read the trends, but we believe that there will be large-scale infrastructure orders after COVID-19. Especially for developing countries, they do not have sufficient budgets, and if we meet government officials, they are looking to introduce foreign investment, and they have concerns about providing guarantees through the central bank. And so these directions will converge together, and that will lead to the development of PPP infrastructure development involving the private sector. And along with such trends, companies should not just become contractors, but they need to become investors. Every year, the Overseas Construction Association announces the orders won by Korean companies. Well, in the past, there were not a lot of investments that were made, but a lot of the Korean companies are working in the Middle East, and they did go through a lot of losses, and we have learned lessons from that experience. And so, rather than focusing on becoming a contractor, they are more focused on becoming an investor. Scanscan of Europe, other global construction companies, we can see that a bulk of their operational profits are coming from investment projects. And so they have switched to investment very quickly, and they are switching to their strategy of localization. And so Korean construction companies are now benchmarking that model from Europe. Here are some issues of Korean consortiums. So if we have investment projects and PPP projects, we obviously need to win these projects. But despite so, it seems that in order to have investment projects, we need to have operational records, but we usually do not have that. We only have construction records, but not operational. These operations were mostly conducted by government-owned companies. And so, government-owned companies should participate as a part of the consortium, or consortium should include foreign companies that have experience in operations. For example, we have a limitation for government-owned companies to invest in up to 500 billion won, and Korean companies that are owned by the government, they do not have a lot of experience in overseas investments. For the private construction companies, even the large companies, their cash flow is not too abundant, and so what they do is they usually invest within the EPC margin. And so if we take that into consideration, especially for large-scale projects, it's very difficult to create the shareholder group. When we have a PPP project, we always talk about the D ratio. This is the ratio between debt to asset. Is usually 8:2 or 7:3, or possibly sometimes 6:4 in some exceptional cases. For example, if there is a project worth 1 billion, then we need to have at least 200 billion in cash. And so for conglomerates, for state-owned enterprises, we do not have the room to make such investments. And so a Korean consortium, it's very difficult for them to have a shareholder group. And we also do not have leverage in negotiating with the government locally. So the industry is asking for various things. First of all, support in negotiations with the local government, and the sharing of information concerning overseas projects, and also for Exim Bank to participate in the initial investments. Chairman Sung has talked about how when we conduct overseas projects, we see various organizations conducting projects in silos. Well, I don't know if it's because of this recognition, but we see that Korean companies are looking to create consortium Exim Bank is working with KOICA, KOTRA, and other relevant organizations to create partnerships. And next year, 5 relevant organizations will conduct a 5-party consultation. Let's take a look at some of the products of Exim Bank, and let me end with that. So, in the development stage, we need FS support. This year, we introduced the FS support system, and we started our project in June, and we conducted the second round in November and selected a total of 11 projects. I will not go into the details due to the time constraint. Here you could see some advisory work that we conduct. So we listen to the issues of the private companies, and we learn that they do not have leverage in negotiating with local governments. So at Exim Bank, we will conduct advisory and we will create Team Korea so that we can become the window for external affairs. Along with that, we also have opportunities to introduce our products so that we can utilize our products for coordination. It's been about 2 to 3 years since we have started such advisory work. We don't have a lot of cases under our belt, but we believe that of the projects that we have supported, one will actually have a deal that they can sign. So this is equity investment. I talked about how the U.S. has launched DFI, and various institutional investors, they are looking into developing in the upstream so that they can connect that with financial issues. Korea Exim Bank is well aware of the market situation as well as a trend towards PPP projects, and so that is why we are looking into making equity investments. This example is an example of Semangka in Indonesia. Korea Exim Bank provided a loan, and as an FI, we participated as an investor as well. Well, I will not go into the export financing. When Korean companies start their business overseas, we will provide a loan for them. So if a Korean company has over 10% share in a local entity, we will provide up to 90% for the project, and that local company will then repay Korea Exim Bank. EDCF is probably well known. Let me now go into EDPF, which may not be so well known. EDPF was introduced this year. It's a new product. EDPF is a part of ODA, and the budget comes from Korea Exim Bank, but the interests, there's a difference between the EDPF interest and the market interest, and that gap is filled through EDCF support. And we believe that this can be utilized for various PPP projects. Before COVID-19, I have had opportunities to visit various developing countries, and many country governments were interested in EDCF and EDPF. Within Korea Exim Bank, we have the EDCF project ongoing and the newly introduced EDPF as well as FS. So we are looking for ways to connect these products. And by connecting these products, we hope that various financial products can be connected, and we believe that we will have some tangible results through this integration. I think I'm up for time, so I will end it here. Thank you very much.
네, 감사합니다.
Thank you for that
두
presentation.
번째 발표.
Let's move on to the third presentation. The title of the presentation is The Vision and Strategy as a Global Leading Country in Contributing to Universal Values and Public Goods. I'm going to invite Professor Kim Tae-gyun for his presentation. Please welcome him with a big hand. Good afternoon. As has been introduced, I am Kim Tae-gyun. I did not come up with this title, but I was given this title. So when I received this title, I wasn't sure how I was going to cover this. And Chairman Song Kyung-yoon mentioned that I had the opportunity to participate in the drafting process along with Professor Kim Tae-hwan, and the content of the vision declaration is very much overlapping with what I am going to present. I still have some questions about whether Korea can become a global leading country or not, but there are many requirements that we need to meet, and we need to understand the global trends that are happening right now. Professor Kim Tae-hwan mentioned some of the very specific things and characteristics of inclusive multilateralism, and the soft power and the role of middle power countries have already been covered. So I don't know if I can deliver this presentation well, but if you have any questions, please ask us. The first topic that I want to talk about is the common ground between peculiarities and universality. So far, we talked about Korean Peninsula as one ethnic group, and that is why we need to provide support for North Korea, because we are one Korea. And this has been a vicious cycle. We need to break away from this by focusing on universal values that can be implemented on the Korean Peninsula. We're not necessarily giving help to North Korea because we used to be one Korea, but because it is based on the universal values of the global community, and we need to continue to build this common ground for inter-Korean exchanges. And when you apply universal values and norms, you can utilize the SDGs that we need to implement by 2030. This is a global objective. And another norm is the HDP nexus that we can utilize. This is the nexus of humanitarian development and peace. This is based on the Bretton Woods system, based on World Bank and the UN system, and all these systems put priority on this nexus. And in 2018, there was a major declaration about this nexus. And this is about including all three values of humanitarianism, development, and peace. And there are now processes going on to develop norms for this. So here we have universal values, and then there are peculiar situations of Korea and peculiar situations of North Korea, and we can find this common ground or space, and we can utilize this common ground in addressing many of the challenges that we have right now. Especially because of the pandemic, this is of course a grave challenge, but we can turn it into an opportunity in making progress on the Korean Peninsula. Health security can be something we promote, and we also have other universal values, such as human rights and inequality. And there are many inequality issues in the healthcare sector, so we can cover them as well and create a virtual cycle. So once again, we need to find a common ground between universal values and peculiar situations. And we need to develop issues that emerge from the Korean Peninsula, but they may be relevant to the global society. And in order to do that, we need to engage all the international actors on discussing peace and denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. We have to argue that these are not necessarily only relevant to the Korean Peninsula, but also the global peace and prosperity. So in that sense, what we can say is that we can promote the Korean Peninsula SDGs. I'm going to talk about this in more detail later, but as you know, the UN General Assembly adopted the SDGs, which are the 17 goals and 120 targets for the global community. So the world is committed to implementing the SDGs. And every 4 years, countries need to submit their progress reports. And Korea submitted the report in 2016, and now we have to submit another report. And North Korea was not able to do it, but North Korea said that that it was going to submit the report by 2021. Now we can work together to create one report from the Korean Peninsula regarding the SDG implementation. This report can cover many issues that we need to address on the Korean Peninsula. Now, national universities are working on this, and we asked this question to the UN. And currently, for countries that submit SDGs, there are several countries that are putting together their reports collectively. So this is not a new situation. Of course, we have to see how inter-Korean relations will evolve going forward, but this can be a good example. In addition, we need to understand Korea's contribution to human civilization amid the pandemic. The pandemic is currently disrupting the global civilization. As the President mentioned, Fukuyama used to be my advisor, and he said that there's liberalization, democracy, and the end of the human civilization. When we look back on the history, you can see how the international society has been evolving and the norms have been changing from the Greek society all the way to changes in the civilization, the European-based international order and industrialization. So there were many phases along the history. Now, what will be coming next after COVID-19? Who is going to set the norms? Who is going to set the order? It could be hard power or soft power. We need a new order. It could be a restoration of liberalism, or it could be resurrection or reform or reshuffling of the existing liberalism. But we want to promote inclusive multilateralism, and to do so, we need to identify what role Korea can play, and this is about an opportunity to do so. Now, there are many contributions we can make. These are two contributions. First of all, we can focus on the Southern Hemisphere. We can represent the Southern Hemisphere as a middle power. It could be ODA or it could be cooperation. But we went through the Korean War and we went through liberalization, democratization, and industrialization. So Korea is in the right position to represent the interests of the Southern Hemisphere as a connector, as a bridge between the Northern Hemisphere and the Southern Hemisphere. We can serve as a bridge between the North and the South. And also in the Northern Hemisphere, we went through advancement of our economy and industrialization. We're an OECD member country, and we have followed the footsteps of the advanced countries in order to achieve an economic miracle. Now we are able to communicate with the advanced countries. Therefore, I believe that there are a lot of spaces where Korea can play a role. Because of the pandemic, now the EU and US that used to represent the liberalism, maybe because of election cycle and so on, they are turning to their domestic issues and they don't have much room for multilateralism. And likewise, in China, they are providing ODA and $4 billion for assistance, but African countries and Southeast Asian countries are refusing to receive assistance from China. Now, China is trying to change the global governance, but that's not happening right now. Now, I believe that there are opportunities for Korea to exercise its middle power together with MIGTA or Australia and other middle power countries. So likewise, the mini multilateralism is something we can exercise as well. Now we need to move beyond the vaccine hegemony, and we need to make vaccines global public goods. And we also need to address health security and food security and climate security as well. And in doing so, we can promote global prosperity and addressing inequality. When you look at the vision declaration, there are 5 specific targets. I'd like to give you some more details about these 5 targets under the vision before I wrap up my presentation. First of all, it is about inclusive multilateralism in order to build a new international order. What I mean by here is, as Professor Kim Tae-won mentioned, it's not about returning back to the liberal international order. It's not about going back to what we used to have before the pandemic, but we want to create a new value system that is inclusive so that all countries can participate on an equal footing. And we want to expand this public domain for inclusive multilateralism. Now the pandemic is underway, and as Mr. Kim mentioned, now there is a turning point in our civilization, and advanced countries are having difficulty in establishing a new order. And now in establishing a new international order in an inclusive manner. I believe that it is up to middle power countries such as Korea, and a collection of middle powers can play this role. The second target is implementing the SDGs and taking the leadership in doing this. This is one of the action plans for the vision. As you know, the motto for SDGs is no one should be left behind. No one, meaning no country and no individual, should be left behind. And everyone should enjoy the benefits of the SDGs, and they should be guaranteed this. Every 4 years, countries need to support voluntary national review, and North Korea promised to report by 2021. It was mentioned already, but next year, we celebrate the 30th anniversary of both Koreas joining the UN. So next year can be an opportunity for the two Koreas to promote reconciliation. And this is something we can propose to North Korea. Now, what can we do regarding this? And there has been some research, and this is something that I am studying as well. What we can try is approach this issue from a cluster perspective. There are many humanitarian activities done by the UN, including food security. So by utilizing the SDGs, we can collaborate with international organizations in promoting food security in North Korea. The third target is strengthening global solidarity for global public goods. I'm sure you know what public goods are. So non-rival and non-exclusive should be the definition of public goods. In the late 1990s, the UN invited scholars to create this discourse on global public goods, and there's a definition already on the right-hand side. You can refer to this table. We can control the non-rival aspect, but when it comes to non-exclusive, it's very hard to control this because there's no global governance, there's no global government. So unless we have inclusive multilateralism, we won't be able to cover global public goods, and we need some kind of control in this. Otherwise, the scope of global public goods will be expanded forever, and it is going to be very difficult to control who supplies and who receives public goods. The fourth target is realizing global social values that focus on peace. These days, as I mentioned before, the humanitarian development peace triple nexus is a key. On the left-hand side, you can see the triangle. And the second notion is peace conditionality. When the UN peacekeeping operations are conducted, there's peace established, and then economic development activities have to be carried out. And these could be seen as a process of colonization, because there are lack of systems and institutions in place. So the UN may put in place peace conditionality to provide assistance. If there's no peace, support will not be provided. I don't know about the Korean Peninsula, but if we have some sort of peace declaration or peace regime, then we will be able to receive investment from various countries, and we have to think about how to control the flow of investment and financial resources. And in the UN, they discuss sustaining peace. This is the target for the future, and this is not something we can achieve right now. We want to make sure that peace is sustainable. We need to be able to maintain peace, and that is related to SDG number 16. And finally, we need to build an inclusive partnership based on mutual accountability. Of course, in promoting inclusive multilateralism, partnership is crucial, but how can we guarantee a partnership that is inclusive? Number one criteria is mutual accountability. It means that all the participating entities need to be held accountable. Otherwise, it will be very difficult to manage the partnership. Otherwise, no one will be taking up the accountability. And the mutual accountability has to be incorporated in some sort of system so that we can enforce this. Otherwise, the basis for inclusive partnership may be very fragile. Here we have the recipient countries and Samaritans that are donors. And you can see the 4 different domains of high effort versus low effort and no help versus help. And usually the dominant strategy is for the donors to provide assistance. But from the perspective of recipients, they will think, oh, okay, donors keep on providing us with support. So then they may not engage in a lot of efforts. And there may be some incentives. And what we need to put in place is some sort of accountability mechanism so that all the entities should be held accountable for their actions and the consequences. And this is the final notion that I just wanted to share with you. There are 5 key targets. I wanted to kind of put them together in one name, but I don't think I was successful. Thank you very much for your attention.
네, 수고 정말 많이
Thank you
하셨습니다.
very much for the presentations. So you had 7 seconds left. You concluded before the time was over. Your presentation was very rich with information. I am sorry that we were not able to give you more time for your presentation. You have given us much food for thought.
지정토론자 3분
We have 3 designated discussants. We have with us from the KDI International Development Cooperation Center, Mr. An Sang-hoon. We have with us Professor Choi Dong-ju of Sungmyung Women's University. And we have with us Mr. Moon Jin-young of KIEP. So we have 3 designated discussants. We would like to enable our discussants to have dialogue with our presenters. So we would only be able to give each of you 7 minutes. Let's start with Mr. An. Yes, thank you. As Chairman Sung has mentioned and as President Yu has mentioned, the Global Korea Convention 2020, within the convention, there are many sessions, and this session is indeed the most important, and it's an honor for me to participate at this very important session. We are discussing inclusive multilateralism. It is indeed the direction that we should be moving in. Let's take a look at just the keywords. So we have the middle power country strategy, overseas strategies, and inclusive multilateralism. Let's try to link all the keywords together. I am the head of the KDI International Development Cooperation Center. We are focusing on development cooperation. Rather than financing, we are more concentrated on knowledge sharing and finding solutions together. So let's take a look at some of these keywords. First, I would like to study middle power country strategy. Professor Kim Tae-hwan has presented already, and I think if he had presented in the morning, it would have been very helpful during the morning session. The morning session covered the Korea's response to the New World Order after the inauguration of the Biden administration. It discussed the diplomatic aspects. So concerning the middle power country strategy, we need to think about why our knowledge sharing project is so popular. We call this KSP. In development cooperation, I think knowledge sharing has already become a proper noun because people know that it's being conducted by Korea. It's been 10 years since we have conducted knowledge sharing, and we have conducted over 1,200 projects in 84 countries, and we still have many countries who wish to join. This is because Korea has a very unique positioning. Secretary General Kim Yong of World Bank has mentioned during his tenure that Korea is a country that experienced all stages of development in a very short amount of time. Professor Jeffrey Sachs of Columbia mentioned that Korea has a clear memory of being an underdeveloped country, but at the same time, it's armed with the strength of an advanced country and therefore will have great contributions. Dr. Klingerville, who is the head of the UNDP Seoul Policy Office, has mentioned that as someone who has experienced development cooperation for a very long time, he's a German person, and He said that when advanced countries give money to Africa, they work through various World Bank projects. They also work with European countries. But when they ask African countries who they would like to collaborate with when they make the investment, they always want to cooperate with Korea. So unlike advanced countries, Korea has a very unique positioning. The underdeveloped countries, they are not inspired by examples of advanced countries, but they're quite inspired by Korea's experience. And they're not really sure when advanced countries approach them if they are there to help them or it's for their national interest. For example, China is investing heavily in Africa, but they now realize that it's not for them, it's about China moving into Africa. And so from that aspect, with our middle power country strategy, we are able to frankly collaborate with the recipient countries. The second key word that I would like to discuss is overseas investment. As the head of the International Development Cooperation, which I have been heading since September, I have had many opportunities to travel abroad until the hit of COVID-19. I have visited Laos, Cambodia, Myanmar are the three countries that I visited in Asia. When I arrive at the airport, I usually see that the road from the airport to the city is usually built by Japan or China. Can we actually make massive scale investments on par with Japan and China in these countries as well? Well, World Bank gave us the answer to this. The key to international development and development cooperation is not money, but it is knowledge. And that's why World Bank wants to become a knowledge bank. During the last half-century, we went through difficulties, but we also achieved rapid economic growth. That remains as knowledge for us, and many countries want us to share this knowledge with them. As Mr. Kim Jong-un has already mentioned, we were a recipient country, but now we are a donor nation, and now we need to play an active role. But we also need to always keep in mind that knowledge is at the key of our competitiveness. And so from some aspects, when we are financing, are we going to provide it in the form of aid like KOICA, or are we going to finance in the form of loan, such as Korea Exim Bank? We have these big models, but we always have to add the component of knowledge sharing. The last key word that I would like to focus on is universal value. Professor Kim Tae-kyun participated in the Cheolwan Forum and last week, and I actually watched this on the online platform. And this is what we have to think about. On one side, when we do development cooperation, we always think about our national interest. Will it help Korean companies move into that market? It sometimes is used as a tool for lobbying. But as I mentioned before, the recipient countries, they already question the intentions of China and Japan, who have already gone down that path. Since we're on the topic of inclusive multilateralism, and we need to focus on universal values. From that aspect, as many people have already mentioned, we need to think about the 17 SDGs, and we need to boil that down to 5 P's: peace, prosperity, people, planet, and partnership. These are the very important 5 P's. I think the 5 P's bring together all of the important universal values included in SDGs. At the International Development Cooperation Center, we take a look at cooperation and economy, but we know that peace is a very important pillar. And it's not limited to economic benefits, but we need to contribute to people, we need to protect our planet, and I would like to emphasize partnership, the last P. Within the development cooperation circle, we always talk about whether national interest comes first or universal values comes first. Well, we are using taxpayers' money to support other countries. So there could be controversy on whether we should make investments, although it's not going to benefit our country. We need to approach this from the perspective of partnership. Standing by universal values is aligned with national interest. This is something that we realized once again in this COVID-19 situation. If we take a look at national interest with a narrow perspective, we cannot find a solution. For example, if we don't collaborate with other countries to defend their country, we cannot stop COVID-19 from coming into our country. Inclusion is one of the three values that the Moon Jae-in administration is emphasizing. And without inclusion, we don't believe innovation will be possible. And that is why we have to focus on partnership. So foreign investment and international cooperation are not separate, but we believe that Korea is now in a position to play that role for universal value through partnership. And so it was a great learning opportunity for me to participate in this session. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. We are running short on time. So, Mr. Choi and Mr. Moon, I am sorry, but I can only give you 5 minutes each for your discussion. So please check the time. Thank you.
저는 지구의 그 국제 질서의 헌정화가
Now,
진행될 거라고
I believe that international order may continue to be fluctuating and changing, and
역할이 결국은 부각되고
I think that the role of global governance will become more emphasized, and regional and global consultation mechanisms will continue to evolve. For instance, the U.S. withdrew from the treaty because of Palestine, but then Qatar came in to fill in the gap that the U.S. left. And not only in BRICS, but also middle powers, their contributions to the UN are expanding rapidly. So when the US is leaving these organizations, the middle powers are filling in the gap very quickly. So I believe that this kind of trend will continue to accelerate, and the role of China will continue to increase. And in that sense, Korea doesn't have an obligation to play a big part, but in this competitive landscape, we need to find our own position in the international community. But there's hope. Because when you think about HDP nexus, this is something that the OECD and the UN is emphasizing. So here in the HDP nexus, Korea is very much near that. For instance, Korea has been promoting inclusive multilateralism, and I think that is the essence of G20. It is about development as well. It is also about finance and how we can promote finance for development. And secondly, in terms of security and peace, Korea initiated the nuclear summit meeting. So these were the two initiatives that Korea proposed, which were successful. And now these are multilateral summits and regimes, but they may expand in the future. Also, the President of the Republic of Korea proposed a consultative body for human health security. This shows that Korea has already been quite active in promoting the nexus of humanitarian development and peace. Now, what should Korea do going forward? I believe that Korea may not necessarily be a rule maker, but Korea can be a norm maker. Right now, China is hitting the walls and they're investing a lot of money, but still there are many Western actors and donors and their values and their policies, but China is pursuing their policies. They used to be in confrontation, but now they are being converged. In that sense, as a norm maker, Korea can play a role, and this is something that we need to continue on. Secondly, there are regimes, multilateral regimes, but there are also the UN type multilateral frameworks among state governments. There are regional multilateral initiatives such as various summit meetings, including Korea-ASEAN summit meeting and New Southern Policy and New Northern Policy. We were able to share our history and the need for democracy, and we also have shared experiences of a war. So President was able to receive a standing ovation in Manila when he delivered a speech. And it shows that there was genuine sense of inclusive multilateralism that these countries were able to appreciate. So, through intergovernmental organizations, we can promote this ideal. In addition, as we have Mr. Kim from Korean Exim Bank, I think there should be more bold actions. Currently, Japan has ADB, and China has IB. China has this investment and infrastructure bank, and so all these power countries have such international financial institutions, but we don't have such an organization yet. Now, I believe that the role of the Exim Bank of Korea has to be expanded so that Exim Bank can become more of a multilateral financial organization that provides financing for assistance. And once again, I want to say that in promoting inclusive multilateralism, Korea is actually in an advantageous position. We have the Secretary General of the UN from Korea that had 2 terms, and the G20 summit meeting was held, and also the nuclear summit and health security summit. All these initiatives were proposed by Korea. Now we have the hard version of peace and the soft version of peace building. And if Korea expands its role in those domains as well, I believe that Korea can become a true global norm maker. And to do so, we need to do more research and we need to study a little more. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we would like to give you a full hour to speak, but thank you for keeping it short. Let us now go to Mr. Moon Jin-young, who is with us on the screen. We would like to ask you to keep your comments within 5 minutes. Good afternoon. I am in charge of the Global Strategy team at KIAP. My name is Moon Jin-young. Thank you very much for inviting me to the session. It is indeed a great pleasure for me to participate. Many people have spoken before me, and overall, we have experienced the change in our status and the international stage. And with the spread of COVID-19, we see that we have gone through the changes in our positioning and our role in the international stage. And I think even the general public in Korea is experiencing this. So it's a great word, inclusive multilateralism. I think it is a way for us to leverage our strengths and our experience to contribute to the international community. And it would be a way for us to look for ways to participate in the international agenda. I think it's high time that we think about these issues. That is why our team is working on finding solutions for common challenges. And so we are very interested in the topic being discussed during this session. From that aspect, what can we do to contribute to the international community? And what kind of international cooperation should we be pursuing? These are some of the questions that we should be asking ourselves. We have conducted similar research in order to contribute to the international community, whether it be inclusion or multilateralism. in the end, we need to play a role in finding solutions. Of course, up until now, we have gone through various challenges. We are a divided nation. We are trade reliant, and we are surrounded by powerful countries. But we were still able to raise our voices and talk about our story because we have our soft power, we have our experience. And so we need to work on winning better recognition in the international stage, and we cannot do this by investing more than others, but rather using soft power. And when we recognize soft power, usually in the private sector, it's about winning other people's hearts. And you may think that public diplomacy and soft power may be mingled together, but we need to make sure that we have support for soft power and for public diplomacy. Well, BTS is winning the hearts of many people around the world. Of course, the government did support BTS, but our capacity is being exploded in the form of BTS. So we need to take a look at how we're going to share our strengths with the international community, and we need to do this in a manner that is respectful of the beneficiaries' culture. And so we need to strengthen our capacity both inside and outside of Korea. And in order to create a friendly atmosphere for our country, we need to think about global public good, global value, as well as contribution to international cooperation. We have always played the role of bridging advanced countries and developing countries, but we need to think about this role again. Is that the role that we should be playing at this point in time? What is the contribution that we can make to the international community? Zero carbon has been announced for 2050. And this is not an agenda just for Korea, but it's an agenda for countries around the world. Currently, we are a part of the developing country classification for the UN climate agreement, but we need to be more proactive in our actions. Regardless of whether we are a developing country or an advanced country, we need to share what we can for the international community, and one way to do this is to use our soft power. And this is not something that can happen overnight with government support, or it's not something that can happen when we share whatever we have with beneficiaries, but rather we need to think about how we can contribute. If we focus on national interest and helping Korean companies move into foreign markets, then that may not be the right approach to soft power. Some companies, for example, in the UK, rank soft power for different countries. But if we think about ourselves, we may think that we have a strong soft power, but many people, when they hear the word Korea, they're not sure if it's North Korea or South Korea. Some people actually think of Kim Jong-un before any other word when they hear the word Korea. So let's keep it at this. Thank you very much.
감사합니다. 하고 싶은 얘기를
Thank you very much. I can see that you have a lot that you want to talk about, but due to the time limit, we unfortunately we don't have a lot of time left. We're running out of time. We're supposed to finish the session by 3:20, but we can spend a little more time for the discussion because I would like to now turn to the presenters for their additional comments in response to the discussions. So first, Professor Kim Tae-hwan. I'd like to thank the discussants for their valuable comments. I wish I could go on, but in the interest of time, I will be brief. Professor Choi talked about norm making, and I can agree. There are two issues. As a norm maker, we can do that, but the question is how? What approach or methodology? When you think about norms, norms are not some of the things you can set as individuals, but you can only set norms through multilateralism by engaging multiple stakeholders. And secondly,
놈은 놈인데 어떤 놈이냐?
Okay, we want to set norms, but what kinds of norms do we want to
이
establish?
놈이라는 게 한국 같은 국가는
In the case of Korea,
중도적인 놈,
I
미드업
believe that we
놈을
need
만드는
to
것이
establish middle-of-the-road norms that are neutral for all groups of countries around the world. Thank you.
네, 팀장님.
Yes.
막상 그 현장에서 그 발주처하고
Well,
좀
if
만나보면
I meet
그쪽에서 먼저
the
한국 측에 이
companies
원팀
on site,
코리아를 요청하는 경우가
they actually ask for the One Team Korea approach. We have KOICA, MOFA, all of these teams. If we have a single team, a one team, then they would find that very helpful. And that is why I talked about One Team Korea. And so I would like to mention that we are playing a role for One Team Korea. Just like Mr. An has mentioned, if we go to a developing country, we see that the governments, they are reluctant to be locked into China or Japan. So they look forward to the participation of Korea. Well, maybe they're saying that because I'm Korean, but that, I believe, is their reality. Just like Professor Che has mentioned, we look forward to Korea Exim Bank challenging ourselves, and that is why we have the EDPF and FS programs, which are quite innovative. And so we are continuing to add our innovative tools, and the loans that we have, we believe that we can be much more bold with the loans as well.
Next, Professor Kim Tae-gyun. Thank you for the comments. I'd like to make two short comments. First of all, our status has been changing, and we have the capability to take the leadership, but we also have to be cautious. We have to be humble and modest, and at the same time, we have to be reflective and reflect on whether we are capable of doing all these things. And when we provide ODA, we provide knowledge, but at the same time, we should not stop at just sharing knowledge, but we have to really help them in a meaningful way. And secondly, when you think about developing countries in the Southern Hemisphere, they may deal with 26 different ODA organizations, and whenever they meet with them, they would say, oh, your ODA has been so helpful, and can you please give us more? So that's the kind of strategy that they pursue. So we need to be cautious in interpreting the messages that we receive from the recipient countries. We need to conduct a more objective analysis of the ODA projects, and we can be more objective in evaluating these ODAs. So we need to be cautious. Thank you.
네, 감사합니다.
Thank you very much. Should we close before we take the picture?
지금 시간이 다 돼서
Yes,
제가
we
긴
are
말씀은
out
안
of time,
드리겠는데
so I cannot speak for a long time.
다들 뭐 같은 생각일 것 같은데 우리
But I think we all have
팀장님께서는
similar thoughts.
말씀해 주시면
Just like Professor Kim has
우리가
mentioned,
스스로 얘기할 때는 우리가 좀 글로벌 코리아를
we
지향해야
always try to be global Korea.
세상을 향해서
But to the world,
세계 선도 국가 뭐 이런 거는 뭐 우리끼리 이제
we should not use phrases such as leading country.
적절하지
I
않은 것
don't
같다.
think that would be an appropriate wording to use.
우리가 포용적 다자주의를 얘기하고
So we're talking about inclusive multilateralism
역할 설정에 대해서
and setting a new role for Korea. Many people have made great statements concerning these topics. But how much of a consensus are we earning from the public? That's very important as well.
백신 그것만 해도 우리가 이제 백신 동맹에
Well, we are a part of the Vaccine Alliance and we're playing our role.
지금
But
강대국들이 입도 선매를
the stronger nations, the more powerful nations, they are trying to dominate the supply of vaccines.
우리 벌써 일부 언론에서
And so some media have reported that Korean government did not act fast enough to secure vaccines for the people.
우리 국민들한테 공감대가
So how much of a consensus can we earn from the people? That's something that we have to think about. The last statement that I would like to make
개발 협력 분야에 있어서도
is
저희
that
대학원이
for the field of development cooperation, our graduate school conducts consulting programs and education.
작년부터는
And from last year, We also have a program for public diplomacy related to the US and Europe. And having listened to the full session, I could see that these important dialogue is being conducted not only on the theory level, but also in practice. And I could see how important this topic is. And so at our graduate school, we hope that we would be able to conduct in-depth dialogue concerning this topic. We hope to host relevant dialogue. And the experts here today, we look forward to seeing you at future opportunities at the KDI School of Public Policy and Management. Thank you very much to our panelists once again. We would like to close the session at that. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Before you step down, we would like to take a commemorative photo. Please stand towards the front of the stage.